So shortly after the not so well received economy changes, Gaijin asked content creators for feedback. We were only allowed to provide one piece of feedback, but that did get me thinking. So I came up with a lot of ideas of what I would change in War Thunder. Obviously, me being me, this will be mostly ground-centric, with some changes to economy at the end. But yeah, let me know what you guys think. Are my ideas good? Would you change them? Stuff like that. First, let's talk about the elephant in the room, Volumetric. Volumetric is one of the biggest sources of frustration in War Thunder, but it can't just be removed. Volumetric armor is more realistic, but it's also more likely to have pixel-sized holes. So while volumetric is sometimes less realistic than pixel shells, we can't go back to pixel shells because they might slip through those holes. Some tanks benefit from volumetric far too much, mostly those with sponsons or really complex mantlets, with the Panther mantlet being a perfect example. It used to be pretty easy to pen, but even stuff like the American 90 has trouble going through it now. As a stopgap fix, I would recommend reducing shell hitboxes across the board. Say for example that a 75mm shell would get a 57mm hitbox. Obviously that could be played around with until you find a sweet spot, but you get the idea. In the meantime, this would reduce the number of volumetric moments that people encounter. As far as a more permanent fix, I would make shell hitboxes a bit more complex, mostly so that glancing hits to thin plates don't destabilize the shell. Now let's move on to sound. Sound needs to be pretty much entirely redone. It's supposed to help convey information to the player, but it does a horrible job at doing that. This is mostly due to poor mixing and sound programming. Some vehicles are obnoxiously loud, some are insanely quiet, basically silent. If two vehicles approach each other too quickly, their engine sounds simply don't play until they're practically on top of each other. If too many tanks are in one area, some sounds don't play at all. And as many of you have noticed during my gameplay videos, some tanks are completely silent while idling. And yes, you can tell their engine is on because it produces exhaust. If you want to be silent, the trade-off should be turning off your engine. I mean, that's why they introduced the battery mechanic. Sound occlusion makes everything sound very muddy, and to add on to that, directional audio is not very accurate. You can think something's off to your side, but actually it's behind you. I found this can be partially fixed with Dolby Atmos, but considering that's an external program you have to pay for, it shouldn't be necessary. So how do you fix these issues? From speaking with people that make sound mods, a lot of these problems could be fixed with competent use of Fmod Studio, the audio program Gaijin uses. Now for something a bit more topical, traction. I firmly believe Gaijin should undo every traction nerf they've introduced in the past. If Gaijin's heat maps show a specific out-of-bounds spot is broken, they should make it inaccessible in the next update. It should probably go without saying, but mobility should not be penalized across the board because of a few bad actors. The traction nerf on Dev may have been more realistic in some circumstances, but if you've watched my Historically Accurate series, you should know that realism isn't always good for a game, and the nerf was very goofy otherwise. Gameplay should always come first. If realism benefits gameplay, then go for it. But there have been instances where I can only get guys out of broken spots because my tank can mountain climb from a spot they weren't expecting. It goes both ways. Now we're going to talk about some more tangential changes. Commander Override has been pretty broken ever since it was added. It makes killing the gunner practically pointless. There should be a short delay before the commander can aim the gun. Not as long as it takes for the gunner to be replaced, so it does still provide an advantage, but also long enough that killing the gunner actually has meaning. Yes, Gaijin already said they would consider this, but I think this is a must-have. As far as replenishing crew members, replenishing at a cap should also heal the other crew, as long as they aren't completely dead. Sorry, not dead, knocked out. For tanks that only have 2 crew members, this would provide a reason to research replenishment. You should also be able to use the context menu to swap crew positions. It's very annoying when your turret crew turns red, hindering performance greatly, and you can't tell the whole crew to take their place. For example, you could have options to swap commander and gunner, swap machine gunner and loader, etc. Next, Gaijin should provide an option to toggle alt decorations off. Yes, this is mainly to combat bushes. This would make it so that bushes don't provide a competitive advantage anymore, but could still be seen by people who use them for decorations. I think only like 20 people actually do use them for that, but still. Some people say this wouldn't work because players bought them for a competitive advantage, so that would open up Gaijin to lawsuits. But I seem to be the only one to remember that in the Bush's dev blog, they were supposed to be entirely cosmetic. After a few hundred meters, they were supposed to stop rendering entirely. In fact, I don't think they ever did that actually. They do switch to a low LOD model, but they still obscure a tank's outline entirely. This makes bushes completely broken, especially at distance. This may seem like a harsh fix, but honestly I don't feel any sympathy for bush users anyway. People have suggested making it so the bushes can be shot off, but that doesn't fix the root problem. Yes, it makes it easier to see weak spots at close quarters, but it doesn't stop tanks from being hidden. Building off of that, Gaijin could introduce a new class of decorations. Stuff like camo nets, sandbags, logs, you get the idea. These would need to be designed and modeled specially for each tank, so they would need to be added piecemeal and would take a long time to make, but I think they would generally be well received, and would give Gaijin another revenue source. For how broken close air support is, the fix is pretty simple. For planes with ordnance or cannons that are capable of destroying tanks that are not open-topped, increase their spawn point cost. As of right now, if you only get a kill or a kill and 1 assist, you can spawn in a plane with bombs, which is simply ridiculous. In many cases, planes can kill tanks with impunity, so if you want a few free kills you should have to put in more work. And to add on to that, helicopter damage models have to be refined. Currently they are mostly empty space, so they eat shots way more than they should. As far as aircraft go, helicopters are pretty fragile, so Gaijin could model more critical systems. Things like control panels, electronics, avionics, you get the idea. Gaijin should also make it so that once a plane or helicopter is counted as destroyed, it can only fire guns. It can't use ordnance like bombs or rockets. So yeah, not to worry, you can still get those funny flat spin kills. Also, scouting in a light vehicle should not make planes easier to spawn. Scouting enemy vehicles is powerful enough, and light tanks don't need that additional buff. As far as battle rating compression goes, the max BR should be increased to around 12.7 or 13.0. Generally, I don't think BR compression is too bad except for one main area, that being mid-tier to high mid-tier, namely 6.7 to 8.7. That area in particular needs a lot of special attention. 6.7 seems to get constant up tiers these days, and it makes the game an absolute slog. Gaijin always says what about queue times, but honestly, if it meant getting fairer matches, I don't think people would mind waiting a bit longer. Now let's move on to tank shells. A lot of shells could use a buff to damage, namely some solid shot rounds, Sabo, medium caliber heat, and medium caliber APFSDS. I've been talking about the last one for quite some time now, and you guys can probably guess why. When you penetrate an enemy tank and it does absolutely no damage, it just creates frustration, especially when you aim very carefully and it still does nothing. Not all rounds should do a ton of damage, but they should at least destroy things they pass through, or pass very close to. And to add on to that, there should never be an instance where you destroy ammo and it doesn't blow up, tanks with blowout panels being the obvious exception, as long as the blast door isn't open or destroyed. The game teaches you that ammo is basically a guaranteed kill, so when it doesn't happen it is insanely frustrating. And on some tanks it leads to the ammo basically being extra armor, i.e. Soviet MBTs. Now on to economy stuff. Honestly, I'm not sure how good my suggestions will be. Even before being a content creator, I never paid much attention to the economy, but I do have a few suggestions. First, get rid of the RP soft cap for matches. Basically, for those that don't know, the more RP you earn, the less you make per event as the match goes on. I think this does a lot to contribute to 1-death levers and a terrible grind. Getting rid of it would encourage players to stay longer, and make the grind a bit more bearable. Slightly increase RP and SL modifiers across the board, especially for ground vehicles. Generally, I find the air grind isn't abysmal, and I feel like the tank grind is much more of a slog. Third, introduce a premium weekend at the end of every month. As you can probably guess, this would temporarily give premium to every player, and give a slight boost to players that already have premium. To take it further, Gaijin could put a slight discount on premium time and vehicles during these weekends. I feel like this would go a long way to make the grind a little bit easier for free-to-play players, especially those with jobs that can't play during the week, and it might entice them to spend more money later on. I would also introduce an advanced talisman. This would give tech tree vehicles greater SL modifiers. Obviously this would cost much more than a regular talisman, but I like this idea quite a lot. If you give players the option to earn them with war bonds, crates, stuff like that, I feel like it'd be a good addition, and make the economy just a bit more bearable, and it would probably bring Gaijin more money. So yeah, that's how I would improve Warthunder generally. I know that a few of my ideas are a bit out there, so I'd love some feedback from you guys. What do you agree with? What do you disagree with? What would you change? I could try sending it to Gaijin, but I doubt it'll go anywhere, so this is mostly just venting for me. Yes, Among Us joke. Anyway, if you guys have suggestions for video topics, leave them in the comments, and I'll see you on the next one.